Baphomet. Some people think that this is the image of the devil, and he's evil. But if you dig in, you'll find his symbology much more substantial than that. We can trace the name of a false idol called Baphomet right back to the 11th century. A letter dating back to 1098 and the First Crusade tells us that before the siege of Antioch, the Crusaders heard their enemies shouting out loudly and praising their idol Baphomet. But most people know of Baphomet through the association, or the supposed association, with the Knights Templar. And the accusation was that these Knights Templar were not Christian at all, but worshipping a false idol, they said, whose name was Baphomet. It just so happens that these accusations were made by King Philip IV of France. And old King Philip, well, he was having a bit of a tough time of things, and the coppers in the treasury were running short. And it just so happened that these Knights Templars had made quite a name for themselves and quite a bit of money. Not only were they crusaders, but they were money lenders. They lent money to the common people, so they may be able to buy land and start farms. And over time they had become very popular, very powerful, and very rich. And so Philip saw these Knights Templars as a threat to his power. By charging the Templars with blasphemous actions, he could kill two birds with one stone. He could get rid of this threat to his power, and at the same time the state would seize their assets and top up the coppers of the treasury. Now, a lot of these Knights Templars were subjected to torture to get out of them a confession that they worship this false idol. Now, it might not come as any great surprise to you that many of the Templars confessed to worshipping this idol called Baphomet, but all of the descriptions were completely different. However, the name Baphomet became forever associated with the Knights Templar, and also associated with values that were non-Christian. So that's the name Baphomet. But what about this image that we're all familiar with? This image that many would say is an image of the devil himself. Well, that image was a sketch drawn by a certain individual called Eliphas Levi, and it was first seen in his book Dogme et Rituel de la Haute Magie, or in English, Dogma and Rituals of High Magic. Now, this drawing was what Levi called the Sabbatic goat, and this Sabbatic goat was based on an old Egyptian cult, which was based around the area of Heliopolis and Mendes. And this cult venerated the goat and their own version of the Greek god Pan. So that's the history. So let's look at the symbolism. Now, this symbol wasn't meant to be evil at all. According to Levi, this was a symbol of absolute balance within nature. and a symbol of pantheism. Now, if we look at the symbol, one of the first things we can see is the torch above his head. And this torch carries the flame of supreme intelligence, and it reflects the elevation of the soul and the spirit above matter. Now, we've seen that he was based on Pan, and so this explains his appearance as an anthropomorphic figure. But there's more to it than that. This joining of man and beast indicates man's union with nature. So this symbol is telling us that man is not above nature, but he is like the other animals of the earth. He is a part of nature. On his forehead he wears the sign of the pentagram, and the pentagram represents the four classical elements: earth, air, fire, and water, and they are unified by the fifth element, that element that represents the spirit or spirituality that binds them all together. Now, if we take a closer look at his physique, I think most people would say that he is primarily male, but he has the breasts of a female. So, what does this indicate? Well, this tells us that within nature, all things share a duality. And this duality is also represented in the arms of Baphomet, one arm being male and the other female. And on one arm is written the word solve, while the other is written the word coagula, which means solve, singular, alone, and coagula, together. On his lap he carries the sign of the caduceus, the symbol of trade and commerce. And this symbolizes his dominion over the works of all men. So let's come back to those arms again, and one points up and the other points down. And this is representative of that old esoteric knowledge. What is above is below. But Levi in his book tells us there's a little more to that depiction. If you look at the drawing, one arm points up to a white moon, while the other points down to a black moon. And the white moon represents the Kabbalistic Sephra of Hesed, and Hesed is the Sephra of mercy. And the black moon represents Gebra, and Gebra represents the application of stringent justice. And so this again tells us about the balance of nature and the balance between mercy and severity. But that isn't enough. Let's take a closer look at this image. The entire figure, the figure itself, represents the four classical elements. If we look closely at the skin of Baphomet, we can see that he has scales. And these scales, of course, represent the creatures of the sea and the waters. And these scales lead off to around his back, where they turn into a plumage, which in turn become the wings of Baphomet. And this represents air. Fire is represented by the spirit of enlightenment and the torch above his head. And he sits upon a throne on top of a globe, which represents the earth. So as you can see, Baphomet is a symbol of nature and the balance between nature. And he represents the pantheistic view that deity is in all things and nature is dualistic, and the role of nature is the balancing force between all things. So with that, I hope you all enjoyed today's discussion. Now, if you've enjoyed today's episode, give us a thumbs up, and if you're not subscribed to the channel already, then the button's down below. And with that, I'll see you again in another 2 weeks on the next one.